It is January 15th, 2026, and the scene unfolding in Kyiv is at once familiar and rare. Familiar because Kyiv has spent years receiving delegations, officials, visitors who arrive with careful itineraries and serious expressions. Rare because this particular arrival carries the weight of time past, of absence, and of return. Kristalina Georgieva, the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, has arrived in the Ukrainian capital. This is her first visit here since 2023. That gap matters. 2 years is not a long time in most political calendars. In Ukraine's recent history, 2 years is an entire era compressed into a narrow space. It is enough time for conditions to change, for circumstances to harden, for decisions made elsewhere to echo loudly on the ground. Georgieva's arrival is not ceremonial. It is scheduled, purposeful, and structured around meetings that go directly to the question of economic stability. She is set to meet with President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, along with other senior Ukrainian officials. The focus of those meetings is the economy and how it is holding together amid an ongoing war. That framing is precise. This visit follows a preliminary agreement on a multi-year lending package. The words preliminary and multi-year sit side by side here, and they tell you almost everything you need to know about the moment. Nothing is finished. Nothing is casual. Everything is long-term. The International Monetary Fund does not travel lightly, and it does not schedule visits like this without reason. When its managing director arrives in a capital city, it is because the institution's relationship with that country is active, consequential, and unresolved. In Kyiv, that relationship has been shaped by extraordinary circumstances. Ukraine is operating under the strain of war. That is not a metaphor. It is an ongoing condition that affects every calculation, every projection, every promise tied to economic policy. And yet, the meetings scheduled during this visit are not framed as emergency talks. They are framed as discussions about stability. That word, stability, appears again and again in descriptions of this trip. Economic stability, financial continuity, planning beyond the immediate moment. It is an assertion as much as it is an objective. When Georgieva last visited Ukraine in 2023, the situation was already grave. Since then, the war has continued, and with it, the need for sustained external financial support. This visit marks a return not just to a place, but to a process. The IMF's involvement in Ukraine has been ongoing, structured around programs designed to support macroeconomic stability. Those programs are technical, conditional, and carefully monitored. They are also deeply consequential. A multi-year lending package is not simply about funds. It is about confidence, about signaling to markets, to institutions, to governments, that a country has a financial anchor even in extreme conditions. The preliminary agreement referenced ahead of this visit sets the backdrop for every meeting Georgieva is scheduled to hold. She arrives not to announce a conclusion, but to engage in continuation. The city she arrives in reflects that same state of in-between. Kyiv functions. Government buildings operate. Officials convene. Life continues. At the same time, the context is never absent. Every diplomatic visit to Kyiv carries an awareness of why these conversations matter so intensely. Economic stability is not an abstract concept here. It is tied to salaries, pensions, public services, and the basic functioning of the state. That is the reality underlying this visit. The IMF managing director's presence signals that Ukraine's economic questions are being addressed not only in documents and video conferences, but face-to-face. There is something specific about being there. In-person visits allow for direct assessment, for conversations that extend beyond prepared statements, for a shared understanding of constraints and possibilities. Georgieva's meetings with Zelenskyy and senior officials are expected to cover the economic landscape as it exists now, not as it was envisioned months ago. War accelerates change. Assumptions expire quickly. That is why timing matters here. January 15th, 2026 is not a random date on the calendar. It comes after months of negotiation, review, and preliminary agreement. It comes at a moment when economic planning must account for uncertainty without being paralyzed by it. This visit is part of that balancing act. There is no public spectacle attached to it. No grand announcement is built into the schedule. The significance lies in the fact of the visit itself. In the world of international finance, presence is a signal. The IMF managing director arriving in Kyiv says that Ukraine's economic situation is not being managed at a distance. It is being engaged directly. One official involved in the planning of such visits once described them simply by saying, "You have to see it to understand it." That sentiment hangs over this arrival. Georgieva is here to see, to listen, and to continue discussions that have already begun on paper and over secure lines. The preliminary agreement on a multi-year lending package suggests alignment on broad terms, but also the need for further work. These are not one-day conversations. They involve fiscal frameworks, reform commitments, and the realities imposed by ongoing conflict. They require a shared understanding of what is possible now and what must be deferred. The IMF's role is not to fight wars or broker peace. Its role is to engage with economic systems under stress and to provide structured support. In Ukraine, that role is tested by conditions that are anything but standard. Yet the language around this visit remains measured. Discussions, stability, meetings. There is a discipline in that restraint. As Georgieva arrives in Kyiv, she steps into a conversation that has been ongoing for years, shaped by events far beyond the control of any single institution. Her presence marks a continuation of that dialogue. As one observer put it quietly, showing up still matters. It is a simple statement, but in this context, it carries weight. The arrival itself is the news. The meetings will follow. The outcomes will take time. For now, what we know is this. The IMF managing director is in Kyiv for the first time since 2023 to discuss Ukraine's economic stability amid an ongoing war, following a preliminary agreement on long-term financial support. That is the moment. That is the setup. Once the arrival moment passes, once the cameras step back and the doors close, the visit becomes something else entirely. This is where the work happens. Kristalina Georgieva, managing director of the International Monetary Fund, is in Kyiv to meet directly with Ukraine's leadership. The schedule is deliberate. The conversations are focused. The setting is formal, but the subject matter is anything but abstract. She is meeting with President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and other senior officials. The agenda centers on Ukraine's economic stability, a phrase that appears simple until you consider what it must encompass in a country facing an ongoing war. Economic stability, here, does not mean growth projections in a calm environment. It means maintaining functionality under sustained pressure. These meetings follow a preliminary agreement on a multi-year lending package. That agreement exists, but it is not the end of the process. It is the framework within which the discussions now take place. A preliminary agreement signals that both sides have found common ground on core principles. It also signals that details remain unresolved. That is why the managing director is there. Face-to-face meetings allow for a level of precision that documents alone cannot provide. They allow for direct exchange, for clarification, for adjustment based on the realities officials describe across the table. The IMF operates through programs that are structured, conditional, and extended over time. A multi-year lending package implies sustained engagement, not a one-time intervention. In the context of Ukraine, that sustained engagement must account for conditions that are volatile by definition. The war affects revenue, spending, logistics, labor, and infrastructure. It shapes every fiscal decision. The discussions in Kyiv are grounded in that reality. These are not hypothetical scenarios. Officials are discussing how the Ukrainian economy functions day to day and how it can continue to do so under current conditions. They are examining the mechanisms that keep public finances operating. This is where the IMF's role becomes most visible. The institution's mandate is to support macroeconomic stability. In practice, that means working with governments to ensure that budgets are viable, that monetary policy remains coherent, and that financial systems do not fracture under stress. In Kyiv, those principles are tested in real time. The presence of Georgieva signals that the IMF considers Ukraine's economic trajectory to be both critical and worth direct, personal engagement at the highest level. She has not come to announce new terms publicly. She has come to assess, to listen, and to continue negotiations already in motion. The meetings are expected to be detailed. They involve senior officials who are responsible for finance, budgeting, and economic planning. These are not symbolic encounters. They are working sessions. One participant in such discussions once described them as quiet rooms where very loud decisions are made. That description applies here. The preliminary agreement on a multi-year lending package suggests alignment on the need for long-term support. It also implies shared recognition that Ukraine's economic challenges cannot be addressed through short-term measures alone. Multi-year commitments require trust. They require confidence in institutions, in governance, and in the capacity to implement agreed frameworks. These are the issues being discussed in Kyiv. The IMF's approach is grounded in analysis and conditions. It does not simply provide funding. It links support to economic policies designed to maintain stability over time. In a war environment, implementing such policies is complex. Yet the discussions continue. This visit underscores that Ukraine remains engaged with international financial institutions at the highest level. It shows that even amid conflict, there is a focus on economic governance and continuity. That focus is not incidental. It is essential. Public services, salaries, and basic state functions depend on economic stability. Without it, other systems strain further. That is why these meetings matter. Georgieva's discussions with Zelenskyy and other officials are taking place in Kyiv itself. The location is significant. Being in the capital allows for a direct sense of context. It grounds the conversation in the lived reality of the country's leadership. This is not a neutral conference room in another city. It is the seat of government of a country at war. That proximity shapes the dialogue. The IMF managing director's presence in Kyiv sends a signal to other international actors as well. It reinforces the idea that Ukraine's economic management remains an active concern, not a sidelined issue. Financial support on this scale requires coordination, confidence, and ongoing oversight. The preliminary agreement referenced ahead of the visit sets expectations, but it does not lock outcomes. These meetings are part of refining that agreement. They allow both sides to review assumptions, to update assessments, and to address constraints that may have emerged since the agreement was reached. War accelerates change. Economic forecasts must be revisited frequently. That reality informs the tone of the discussions. They are serious, but they are also pragmatic. There is an understanding that economic stability in Ukraine is not a static target. It is a moving one, shaped by external conditions and internal resilience. The IMF's role is to provide a framework within which that stability can be pursued. The Ukrainian government's role is to implement policies within that framework while managing the demands of wartime governance. These roles intersect in the meetings taking place now. One official familiar with such engagements once said, "The numbers matter, but the context matters more." That sentiment captures the essence of this visit. The numbers are being discussed: budgets, projections, financing needs. But they are discussed against the backdrop of an ongoing war. This is why the visit is described as focused on economic stability amid conflict. The phrase, "amid the ongoing war," is not an aside. It is central to the discussion. It frames every decision, every commitment. The IMF managing director's visit is part of a broader process that has unfolded over years. It reflects continuity and engagement, even as conditions evolve. Her last visit was in 2023. Since then, the situation has changed, but the need for economic support has not diminished. This return to Kyiv marks a reaffirmation of that engagement. It is not a reset. It is a continuation. The discussions underway are expected to feed back into the IMF's internal processes. They inform assessments, reviews, and next steps related to the lending package. They also provide Ukrainian officials with an opportunity to convey their priorities directly. This exchange is central to how international financial support functions. It is not unilateral. It is negotiated. As the meetings proceed, there is no expectation of immediate public outcomes. The significance lies in the substance of the dialogue, not in announcements. This is careful work. It unfolds over hours and days, not minutes. The visit itself is a marker in that process. As one person close to such negotiations once put it, this is how continuity is built, conversation by conversation. That idea resonates here. Georgieva's presence in Kyiv is one conversation in a much longer sequence. But it is an important one. It takes place at a moment when economic stability is both fragile and essential. As the meetings conclude and the visit draws toward its end, what remains is not a single document or announcement, but a reinforced process. This trip to Kyiv is defined as much by what it does not do as by what it does. It does not declare an endpoint. It does not resolve every uncertainty. It does not claim finality. Instead, it affirms continuation. Kristalina Georgieva's presence in Ukraine on January 15, 2026, marks her first visit since 2023. That fact alone gives the moment its shape. It connects past engagement with present necessity. The discussions held during this visit sit within a longer arc of coordination between Ukraine and the International Monetary Fund. That arc is shaped by agreements, reviews, and sustained dialogue. The preliminary agreement on a multi-year lending package provides the immediate backdrop. It signals alignment on direction while leaving room for further work. That balance is intentional. Multi-year financial support is not something that unfolds in a single meeting or a single visit. It is built through repeated assessment and adjustment. This visit fits squarely into that model. The focus on economic stability amid an ongoing war is not rhetorical. It reflects the central challenge facing Ukraine's economic governance. Stability, in this context, is about maintaining continuity. It is about ensuring that the machinery of the state continues to function even under extraordinary conditions. That goal requires sustained engagement. The meetings held in Kyiv are part of that engagement. They provide space for direct exchange between international financial leadership and Ukrainian officials responsible for navigating unprecedented constraints. There is significance in the fact that these conversations happen in person. They allow for nuance. They allow for context. They allow for a shared understanding that is difficult to replicate at a distance. As the visit concludes, there is no single sentence that captures its outcome. That is by design. The IMF's work is iterative. It progresses through stages, each building on the last. This visit reinforces the stage currently underway. The preliminary agreement remains preliminary. The multi-year nature of the lending package underscores that support is conceived over time, not as an immediate fix. This approach aligns with the realities Ukraine faces. War does not pause for economic planning, and economic planning cannot wait for war to end. The two unfold simultaneously. That tension defines the environment in which these discussions take place. The visit also carries symbolic weight, even if that is not its stated purpose. International financial institutions operate on confidence as much as capital. Presence matters. Engagement matters. Showing up, in this context, is a signal of commitment to the process. One official once described such visits by saying, "It's not about the headlines. It's about staying in the room." That sentiment captures the quiet significance of this trip. The IMF managing director's return to Kyiv after 2 years reinforces that Ukraine remains firmly within the institution's field of engagement. It says that economic stability in Ukraine is not treated as a distant concern, but as an active priority. As the meetings conclude, the immediate next steps return to institutional processes. Assessments will be updated. Discussions will continue. The preliminary agreement will move through the stages required for implementation. None of that happens on camera. What the public sees is the arrival, the meetings, the departure. What happens next unfolds over time. The lending package discussed is described as multi-year. That descriptor matters. It acknowledges that Ukraine's economic challenges are not short-term. It also acknowledges that solutions require patience and persistence. The IMF's involvement is structured around that understanding. This visit reinforces continuity rather than disruption. It does not introduce a new framework. It advances an existing one. That continuity is essential in an environment defined by uncertainty. Economic actors, both domestic and international, look for signals that systems remain intact. Engagement at this level provides such signals. The discussions with President Zelenskyy and senior officials underscore that economic governance remains a priority alongside all other demands of wartime leadership. That balance is difficult to maintain, yet it is precisely what these conversations are designed to support. The IMF's role is technical, but its impact is felt broadly. By supporting macroeconomic stability, it helps create conditions under which other systems can function. This visit is one element of that support. As Georgieva departs Kyiv, there is no sense of closure. Instead, there is a reaffirmation of process. The story does not end with her departure. It continues through implementation, monitoring, and further dialogue. That is how international financial engagement works. It is incremental. It is deliberate. It is sustained. The fact that this visit takes place amid an ongoing war underscores the stakes involved. Economic stability is not an abstract goal. It is tied to daily life, to governance, and to resilience. The IMF's engagement is framed around preserving that stability under extreme conditions. This visit strengthens that frame. One participant in such processes once said quietly, "Stability is built one decision at a time." That idea resonates here. The decisions discussed in Kyiv during this visit contribute to a broader effort to maintain continuity in the face of disruption. They do not resolve every challenge. They do not eliminate uncertainty, but they move the process forward. The return of the IMF managing director to Kyiv after 2 years is a marker in that ongoing effort. It reflects sustained engagement, careful negotiation, and recognition of the realities on the ground. As the visit concludes, what remains is the work itself. The meetings are over. The discussions will continue. The agreements will be refined, and the process moves on. That is the nature of this story. It is not about a single moment, but about persistence. It is about institutions continuing to function, conversations continuing to happen, and commitments continuing to be examined under pressure. In that sense, the visit leaves behind something quiet but consequential: continuity. And sometimes, in moments like these, continuity is the point.